The note scrawled on Mary's desk proved to be the last straw. Weeks before her disappearance and death, Mary McGinnis bought a handgun that she kept hidden in her car. Owning a gun in the United States, especially in the state of Texas, is no big deal, and some even consider it not just a right, but an obligation. Mary McGinnis, though, was never a hunter or gun enthusiast, so when she started packing a pistol, her closest friends and family members knew that she was frightened of something or someone. Although Mary was a bit of a private person, she apparently felt that the threats from Young, or perhaps someone else, were grave enough that she needed to be armed because she did tell a couple of her closest friends about the handgun. Mary was no expert in firearms, so her husband gave her the gun and showed her how to use it. Also, the day Young was fired, Mary's employers told her to stay home in order to defuse the situation, which turned into a scene anyway, as Young demanded to see Mary and had to be escorted out of the premises. October 15th was the last day Mary was seen alive. By all accounts it was another Sunday for Mary McGinnis. She ran a number of errands and visited a friend named Lori Gemmell. According to Gemmell, McGinnis called her from a store during the afternoon to tell her, "There is someone here who is giving me the creeps." Not long after that call, McGinnis then called 911. The transcript of the 911 call has never been released to the public, but a detective who worked on the case and heard the tape said that it had their blood chilled listening to it. After the 911 call, Mary McGinnis' trail went cold. When Mary did not return home that evening, her husband of 17 years, Mike, filled a missing person report. In an unfortunate twist that brought Mary McGinnis' case together with Mary Henderson's, the body of McGinnis was found shot to death in a vacant lot outside of Houston. Despite the similarities of both women being found murdered in their cars, the method of murder was clear in the McGinnis case. She had died of a single gunshot to the head from her own gun. At first glance, it looked like a suicide, but as homicide investigators examined the scene more closely, they learned that the scene looked staged and it was instead a poor attempt to throw them off. Mary had been beaten and gagged, and her car keys were left outside the car. Investigators quickly learned about Dwayne Young, who then went to the top of their suspect list. But as homicide detectives looked into Young's background, Mike Morris soon joined Young as a person of interest. Morris supplied investigators with samples of his DNA and gave initial interviews, but he declined to take a polygraph exam, hired an attorney, and refused to cooperate with investigators as the case dragged on. Morris also refused to allow his 16-year-old daughter to be interviewed by police. Since it is a person's constitutional right not to talk to police in the United States, Morris did nothing legally wrong in that respect, although his actions placed him further under the police radar. The more investigators focused on Morris, the more they learned that there was trouble in paradise at the Morris household. Although it was never proved, allegations of infidelity by both Mike and Mary surfaced. Infidelity is always considered as a motive in spousal murder. Whether it is murder to get rid of a spouse in order to be with a paramour, or done out of anger towards a cheating spouse, unfaithfulness must always be considered motive by police. The infidelity motive seemed to go nowhere, but it was not long before more perplexing inconsistencies came to light. It was learned that Mike had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Mary, which alone is not enough to convict or even get someone arrested for murder, but greed is one of the most common motivations for murder throughout history. Then there was the mysterious phone call. Records indicate that on the afternoon of October 15th, about 2 hours after she called 911, Mary received a call on her cell phone from Mike. Mike claims that he did in fact make the call when he was with his daughter at a movie, but that the call went straight to voicemail. Records show that the call was answered and lasted for 4 minutes. Morris claimed that the phone company must have made a mistake. Although it is possible that the phone company could have made a mistake, it seemed extremely convenient for the suspect in a murder investigation that such a mistake, which is nearly unheard of, would happen at this critical juncture. Mary McGinnis was also not robbed. In fact, the only valuable item that appeared to have been taken from her was a ring, which was later found in the possession of their daughter. Mike later told investigators that his wife had lost the ring before her murder and that he and his daughter had found it in the house later. The final piece of circumstantial evidence that points towards Mike Morris as the perpetrator in his wife's murder is the actual murder weapon. The gun that was used to kill Mary McGinnis was actually Mike's gun. He gave the gun to Mary after Dwayne Young's stalking reached its peak, and only he and some of Mary's closest friends even knew about the gun or where she hid it underneath the seat. Clearly, many of Mary's friends, law enforcement, and the people of Houston in general began to think Mike was good for his wife's murder, but the evidence was just not there to make an arrest, never mind win a conviction in front of a jury. Eventually, Mike and his daughter moved back to his native West Virginia where he still presumably lives to this day. But even if Mike Morris or Dwayne Young was responsible for the murder of Mary McGinnis Morris, the elephant in the room remains, was her murder connected to Mary Henderson Morris's? A hit gone wrong. Once the theory of a homicidal cyborg from the future that came to Houston to kill women named Mary Morris was eliminated, investigators were left trying to determine if the two crimes were connected or just some strange, macabre coincidence. It is difficult to get past the two victims' similar names, appearance, the type of location where the bodies were discovered, the manner in which they were killed. Because of the plethora of similarities, many have concluded that either Mike Morris or Dwayne Young hired a hitman to kill Mary McGinnis, but in a cruel case of mistaken identity also killed Mary Henderson. An anonymous caller to the Houston Chronicle said, "They got the wrong Mary Morris," in reference to the murder of Mary Henderson Morris. But investigators remain unconvinced that the two homicides are related. As far as the dates go, they are so close they could be linked, said Harris County Sheriff's Detective Wayne Coleman. But when someone is hired to kill someone, they are going to have their information and know their habits. Hitmen don't just go out with nothing. As of 2016, both cases remain cold. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction.